Hey, I'm Max and welcome to part 4 of this tutorial. The first thing that I want to do in this part of the tutorial is to make it so the players don't always follow the mouse, because it's kind of annoying if you want to move out of the window, they always follow. So let's make them only follow when we click our mouse. To do this, we need to go in our input action map that we created when we created the player input. Then we can double click to open it up, and we have our actions look. We want to create a new action with the plus at the top right. Call it, for example, click. Then we want to click on the plus next to click to add a binding. So now we have two binding. For the first binding, we're going to click next to path, go into mouse, and then left button. You can click keyboard and mouse for the control scheme. Then in the next one, click again. This time go into touchscreen and press single touch. Then you can click touch. Also, one last thing you need to do is go on your click action right here, and to the right in the action type, change it from button to pass through, and this will allow it to detect when you press and when you release the key. So once you've added your two bindings and set the action type to pass through, you can click save asset at the top left. Then we can close it and go back into our player controller script. In our player controller script, we want to type public void on click, because we just called the action click. If you called it something else, put on and then the name you use. And as parameter, the same thing as above, we pass input value. Then inside we want to do if value dot is pressed, which is going to return if the mouse button was pressed or released. So at the top we want to add a public bool moving. So by default it's going to be false. If we press the mouse button, we want to set moving equals to true. Else we want to set moving equals to false. And on look, so when we move the mouse or when we drag our finger, we want to do if we are not moving. So if the mouse button is not down or our finger is not on the screen, then we simply want to return, which means it will not execute all of this code. So this is sort of a cleaner way to code. You could do if moving and then put all of that code in here. That will work too, but you can see if you do that with multiple things, you have multiple ifs inside of other ifs and it's very messy. So it's way cleaner to do this. So just with this simple code here, we should now only move when we press our mouse button or when we touch the screen. So let's try it out. So now it doesn't follow my mouse, and if I click and hold, you can see it follows, and if I stop clicking, it doesn't follow anymore. So that's useful if you just want to move your mouse around without moving the characters. Okay, the next thing that we have to do is the biggest part of the game probably, and it's the banners that when you go through them, it adds characters or removes them. So I actually didn't make a mesh for the banner, but I actually found a cool way to do them. So I actually just use a simple PNG like this with a gradient on it at the top and the bottom. And then what I do is create a 3D object, and I usually use a cylinder. Then I duplicate it and move it to the right. Then I make them both have a scale of, let's say, 0.3 on all axes, except maybe Y, so it's tall. I also delete their capsule colliders. Then I create a new 3D object with a simple plane. I rotate that plane minus 90 degrees on the x-axis. Then scale it down to maybe 0.5. Yeah, that's good. And then on the z-axis, maybe 0.2. So actually this might be a bit big, maybe 0.3. So you can size it however big you want your banners to be. So I think this is good. And now to make sure everything's aligned, I'm going to put them all at 0, 0. Except for the height, I'm going to put the banner a little higher. And then move both of my cylinders also to 0, 0. So just putting everything at 0 so they're all aligned. And then my cylinders, I'm going to move them up like this. Move one to the left. So let's say minus 1.5. So this might actually be easier for you to just make a mesh for it, but that's how I did it in my game. It's pretty easy to make meshes with simple parts in Unity. So for the Z, I think scale 1.5 might be good. Let's try it out with the player for scale to see if the scale is good. So I think this might be actually a bit small, so I'll just make it slightly bigger, like this and this. So 0.4, 0.2, and then the cylinders, I'll just move them a little bit and make them both a bit taller. And just like that, I've made a pretty cool banner. Now for the cylinders, I usually just make them the same color as the player, so I just drag in my material for my player. But obviously you can just make an empty blue material. And now the magic for the plane, I'm going to create a new material, call it plane. And on this one, I'm going to put on the base map my picture of my beam with a gradient at the top and the bottom. And now if I apply this, you can see it doesn't look great. But if I click at the top, surface type, I change it to transparent. Now you can see there's sort of a gradient at the top and the bottom. And now if I want it to be a bit darker, I can simply reduce the color. And you can see I can also reduce a little bit the alpha, so it's kind of transparent a little bit all of the time. So in my case, I'll just leave it white, but reduce a little bit the alpha. And now you can see I have a pretty cool banner with 2 cylinders. You can even change the color if you want, so you can put it red if it's a bad number and green if it's a good number, for example. I guess I'll put it yellow so it's a little bit cooler than white. Now what I'll do is set the 2 cylinders as a child of my plane by simply drag it in on my plane. So now you can see I have my plane with my 2 cylinders under, so if I move my plane, they both follow. And then on my plane, I will right click and go into 3D object and then click text mesh pro. So this will ask you to import the text mesh pro. You can simply import them. And now you can see it adds a text on my mesh. So you can simply rotate it so it looks good. So just rotate it like this and then maybe reduce the width to, let's say 10. And the height, I think that's good, maybe 6. So just like this, a width of, let's say 8, and then I can reduce the text font size to 12 maybe, or actually it's going to be numbers, so let's just put times 10 to test. So if I put a 10, that's too small, 30, 40 is pretty good. Then I'll center it in the alignment here, and I'll change the text color to, let's say, black, so it's easy to see. Yeah, I think get black is pretty good to see. And I can also put an outline, let's say in white, so it's even easier to see. And I can put it in bold. So obviously you can set this up however you want, with whatever background color and text color you want. And also, if you see that your text is sort of fading in, you can try to move it just a little bit forward, so it will be over the plane. So just like this should be good. So now all we have to do is add a trigger collider to this banner and then spawn it from our script, and when we go through it, we add some players. So click on your plane game object, remove the mesh collider, and add a box collider. Now for this box collider, I actually usually make it a bit bigger, so you make sure that the player don't miss it. Even if you kind of touch just the poles, that's good enough. But obviously set this up however you want. And also make sure to click is trigger. So now that this is done, you can simply drag your plane into your prefabs. Make sure that you have all of your childs, your text, and your cylinders in it. And then you can delete it from your level. Next, if I go back in my road script, I can add at the top a banner prefab. And every time I teleport the road, when I have a chance of adding a spike, I can also have a chance of spawning a banner. So I can do, for example, if chance is less than 20, so this will be a 20% chance of spawning a banner. And the way I'll do it is the same way as the spike. So I'll just call this one banner so it's not confusing. Banner prefab, so it spawns a banner instead of a spike. And also set my banner transform to the road. Then you probably don't want to spawn the banner anywhere on the road, but instead to the right or the left. So the way you could do this is, instead of using a random, you could do, for example, -4, so they will spawn on the left side. And if you want to reroll your chances, you can simply copy and paste the chance, so it will now generate a new number, so you can add again another banner, so another 20% chance, but not the same one, because otherwise it's going to be either 0 or 2 banners. So by resetting our chance, we can now have one or the other, or both, or none. And this one will put it to the right, so +4. Then make sure to go in your road part prefab, and then go in the road script and drag in our banner prefab we just made. And make sure to save so it's applied to all of your roads. So now you can see all of my roads have the prefab. So when I play, it has a chance to spawn a banner just like this. So we can see our banner's height is not good, so we need to fix this. We can see if we open up our banner, in my case, the Y by default is 1.9. So that means the center point of my prefab is 1.9 of the ground. So if you want to see this, you can simply double click your prefab and check the base game object, the Y value. So in my case it's 1.9, so I'll add 1.9 here when spawning them. So now you can see our banners are spawning and they now have the right height. But you can see the spikes are spawning inside of them, so that's not very good. So if you want to create a little offset between them, what you can do is play on the Z value. So for example, you could have the spike spawn at -5 or maybe a random dot range and then put, let's say, -5 or -4 to -5. And then the banners, you could spawn them maybe a little bit further, so maybe 2 instead of 0. So obviously use whatever values you want, you can try them out, change them, see what it does. So you can see now with the values I put, all of my banners spawn a little bit further behind the spikes, because my spikes are between -5 and -4, and my banners are at 2, so a little bit further. But you can see how big the roads are, so you could play a little bit further ahead and behind. So you can see now this works great, but they are all ×10, and also if you go through them, it doesn't do anything. So next, to add the banner function, we need to create a new C# script and call it, for example, banner script. Then if we open it up, we will first need to get the text component on our banner. So for this, we need to type at the top using tmpro, just like this. Then at the top, we can create the variables bool multiply to see if it's a banner that multiplies or adds. Then int amount, which will be the amount added or multiplied. And finally, we can create a bool used, so we can set it to true once it's been used to make sure that the banner is not affected twice if 2 players go through it, for example. Next, we can actually delete the start and update, we don't need it. We can create the public void on trigger enter, which will be called when we enter the trigger of our banner. So then we'll do if the banner was not already used, so we don't use it multiple times. Then we want to find the game script, so game equals to find object of type game, which is our game script. And remember, it is in our game script that we created the function to create players. So then we just need to find out how many players we need to create. So for this, we'll type int players to create. And now if we are adding a number, we simply need to add the amount. But if we are multiplying, then we need to add the current amount of players times the amount that we have. So to do this, you could do a if else, or you could do it in one line using this simple thing. You type multiply question mark, then you type what happens if it's true. So we'll do game.players.count times amount. So if multiply is true, we will add the amount of players times amount. And actually, to be accurate, you do amount -1, because for example, if you have 3 players and you go through a ×2, then 3 times 2 will be 6, but you don't want to add 6, you want to become 6. So the 1 is sort of the amount we already have. So basically, if you want to do ×5, you actually need to add ×4, right? And then you can close the parenthesis, and to do the else, you simply put a colon, and then the colon you can just put amount, because if it's an addition, you just add the amount. Then you can call game.createPlayers, players to create, and make sure to set your use to true, so the banner will not be used again. So now when we go through it, it should work, but we need to set our multiply and amount randomly when we create the banner. And also we need to set our text. So for this, I think the simplest thing to do is create a public void set data, for example. Then we have a bool multiply and a int amount. Then we can simply set the data inside of our script. So this.multiply equals to multiply. And if you don't know, when you have 2 variables with the same name, so one in your class and one in your function, if you do this.the name, it's going to be the one on top. So you can see if I highlight it, it highlights the one on top. And then if you don't use this, then it's going to use the one in the function. So this is the same as if we remove this and did, for example, multiply equals to mult. So it's the same thing. But if you want to use the same name, you can do this.amount equals amount. Next, we need to set our text to show the player what the amount is. So for this, we can simply do text mesh pro and then call it, for example, text equals to get component text mesh pro, just like this. Then we can do text.text. So text is a variable in the text mesh pro class. And we can set it equals to the text that we want. So first of all, if it is multiplied, so multiply question mark. Then we want to put a X for times. Otherwise, we want to put a plus, so it's the same thing as above. Then we can do plus amount, so it shows the amount that is multiplied or added. So this will set our data and then set our text. And this will make it so when we go through it, it will create the amount of players we want. So the last thing we have to do is in our road script, when we create our banners, we want to go banner.getComponent banner script. So we get the banner script on the banner. .set data, and then we set it to something random. So for the multiply, I'll just do random.range 0 to 1. And you can see when you do a random range with ints, the max is exclusive. So 0 to 1 is actually just 0. So I'll do 0 to 2, so it will actually be 0 or 1. And then to make it into a boolean, so it's either true or false, you can simply do is greater than 0. So if it rolls a 0, it's going to be an addition. If it rolls a 1, it's going to be a multiplication. So that's a 50-50 chance, but if you want to have more chance of addition than multiplication, because multiplication is much better to have, obviously, so you don't want as many, you could do, for example, 0 to 6. So it will actually be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And you can do multiplication if it's greater than 4, so it will be 1 chance out of 5 to be a multiplication, and the rest will be addition. So I think this is much better, but obviously use whatever you want. And then the amount, I'll just do random.range, and I'll do from 1f to, let's say, 15f, but again, whatever you prefer. And actually, you cannot have 1.5 players, so I'll just do 1 to 15. Make sure to do it also for the other one, for the other banner on the other side, if you did like me. So then you can save and go back in Unity, and then make sure to go on your prefab, open up your banner prefab with a double click, go on your banner, and add the banner script we just made. So now let's see if it works. Okay, so we just got an error at banner script 29. Let's see what it is. Banner script 29. It seems like it couldn't get our component. And that's actually an important lesson as well. So you can see our banner script is on our banner game object, but our text mesh pro is on a child of that game object. So if we do in this script, get component text mesh pro, where is the text mesh pro? It's not here, it's in the children. So it's very important when you get the component in a children of the game object that your script is on, you do get component in children, and now it should work. Let's test it out. Okay, so now the text changed to +10, which is good. Let's see what happens when I go through it. It should add 10 players, and it just added 10 players, or at least I didn't count them, but probably 10. For the sake of testing, I'm going to increase the chances to 100, and also make the amount start at 2, so it doesn't do ×1, and even +1 is kind of pointless. And actually, now that I think about it, you probably want additions up to a big number like 15, but you probably don't want ×15, because if you have 10 players, and then you go through a ×15, now you're gonna have 150, that's way too much. So again, you could use the same thing we did in the banner. So you could calculate beforehand if the banner is going to be a multiply. So bool multiply equals to what we put in the first parameter. Now you can simply pass your multiply here. And for the random range in the second parameter, we can do multiply question mark. So if it is multiply, we want to use a certain range, and addition another range. So this will be the addition range, and the multiplication range, I'll just do 2 to 5, so up to 4, because I probably don't want anything more than ×4, that's way too much. I'll just put this at the bottom right here as well, and now you should have big additions but smaller multiplications, because a ×10 or a ×12 is just way too much. So now you can see this seems to have worked well. Now we have +11, +2. So if I go to the +11, there's +11. I can still die on the spikes. +14, that works fine. The regrouping mechanics works as well. Let's try to go to a ×4, see if it works. Okay, it seems to have worked. There's a lot. Let's go to a ×4 again. Oh my god. And the spikes works fine. Regrouping works fine. Obviously, there's gonna need more spikes and less chance of a banner, because otherwise I'm gonna have way too many. Going on the cylinder again. Oh my god, that's way too many. So we need to put a max player. To add a max player count, if you want to do that so it doesn't lag out if you have too many players, you can simply go in your create players function and do if players.count is greater than your limit. So let's say 100. then return, so it will not create players even if you go through a banner. Then we can also do else if player.count plus amount, so if we add the full amount, it will go over a limit of 100. Then we want to set our amount equals to 100, which is our limit, minus players.count. So if we are already over a limit, just don't create anything. If adding this amount will go over the limit, then set the amount to what it needs to reach the limit. So now if I go through times 3, there's quite a lot of players. Now let's go through both of these banners. Now there's a lot. Let's see times 2 how much it will give us. And you can see it barely went up because we reached our limit of 100. So now we have our 100 players right here. Even if we go through banners, it doesn't go up. Now if we delete some players and go through some banners, you can see it went up again. If I delete some more, it goes up again. And if I go to the times 2, it should reach our limit of 100 again. And just like that, we're at 100 again. If you put the limit too high, you risk creating bugs and having the players go too far ahead, which will make it sort of unplayable. And also you risk creating a lot of lag, especially on mobile. So you can see now I can kill my players. There's some decals on the ground. I can add some players. So the game is pretty much playable. There's a few things we need to do still, such as if you go off the map, you need to die, right? Otherwise there's no way to lose, you can just go off the map. I also want to speed up the game the longer you live, and then show how to build the game. So stay tuned for the next parts.